Hi there folks, and welcome to this session all about Paper 1 Question 4 of the GCSE AQA English specification. This question is all about AO4, which is evaluating texts critically. So this session is going to be split into two sections. The first section is all about introducing you to this question and what you have to do and what the examiner is looking for, and how to decode the question in terms of why it's laid out in the way that it is. And the second half of this presentation is applying that to an extract, which is available on AQA's secure online portal. So there's two halves to this. So the first half is learning what the question is about and how to approach it, and the second half is applying that to an extract and showing you an example of a response, or at least part of a response, with this particular question. The reason why there's a snake there is because a snake features in the extract that we will look at later. So that's the reason why that is on the front of this presentation. So to give you an introduction to this question, the central phrase for this question is critical evaluation. Which means that you will be asked to give your personal reflection or your personal response to a particular aspect of the text. This question will always be about the end of the extract or the second half of the extract. So as with other questions, it's very important to make sure that you know which section of the text you are looking for. So it's usually the second half of the extract. And the task will always end with the phrase, "to what extent do you agree?" And that's a phrase that's often used in exam questions, not just for GCSE, but for A-level as well, because it's prompting you to give a personal reaction to the text. What's in capitals there is really important. And I have always told my students that they should either strongly agree with the statement or partly agree with the statement, but never disagree with the task. The reason for that is because the question will almost be a leading question, that the question will be written because there is enough evidence there for you to agree with it. And when students disagree with a question, it's sometimes a lot harder to find the evidence. So to make it easier for yourself, I have always said to my students, you should either strongly agree or partly agree, but never disagree with the task, because the task will be worded as a statement. So you should always strongly agree or partly agree with it. The task itself will be about something specific about the text. It could be about a particular theme. It could be about the presentation of a particular character, the presentation of a particular setting, or it just could be something like an emotive reaction. So, the creation of sadness or sympathy or anger could also be a focus as well. So the task will always be about something specific. You're being asked to give a response about something specific about the text. And this is the task, really, which is mostly linked to literature. So if you are more keen about literature and you find writing literature essays easier than language, then this might be a question that suits you, because fundamentally, when we talk about theme or character or setting, it's often much more of a literature response than a language response. So the task will be very specific. So the specific task that we're going to be looking at today is all about a girl called Ruby. And you can see here I have got the screenshot of the question. It will tell you at the top there which lines to look at, so line 17 to the end. So I've highlighted that because you should always stick to that end section. And then we have the quotation, and the quotation is the task. Something that somebody has allegedly said. Chances are the exam board has made them up, but they are worded as if somebody has said them. It's usually a student. So in this example, we have a quotation that says, "This part of the text, when Ruby is bitten by a snake, shows how clever she is." Okay, so that is the task. That is what somebody has said. And in that task, we have a key word. It's the word clever. And that key word has been highlighted in that task because that underpins the evidence that you were looking for in the extract. Everything that you find in the extract must be to do with proving that Ruby is clever. And therefore, by proving that, you're then agreeing with this student who allegedly said this. Okay, and then we have to what extent do you agree? So it's kind of the exam board way of saying over to you. What do you think? And because there's always going to be more evidence in the text to agree than disagree, you should always agree with it to some extent, either completely or partly. But as I said before, you should never disagree because it's much harder to find the evidence. You will always have 3 bullet points as well. The first bullet point always tends to be related to the specific task, so that changes each year. So for this task, it's about our impressions, the reader's impressions about Ruby and her reaction to after she was bitten by this snake, and it's a venomous snake. But the second 2 bullet points, the second and third bullet point will always be the same. Evaluate how the writer shows how clever Ruby is. So whenever the exam board is asking you about how, it's about writer's methods, which is another way of saying language and structure. Okay, primarily, students tend to focus on the language rather than the structure of the piece, particular words or phrases. So whenever you're asked to evaluate how the writer, it means evaluate the writer's methods, which means language and or structure. You will often find that the most successful responses are the ones that use the writer's methods, the language and the structure, to support their own view. Okay, so it's important that even though this is not a language question, that you still refer to language and writer's methods or structure. And as we might expect from an English GCSE, the third bullet point is reminding you to quote from the text, which is what you've been doing for all the questions for the reading section in both papers. 20 marks, so 20 minutes or so. This question is designed to create a mini essay. Students often find that they write the most for this response because you've got 20 minutes. So students often find that they can write 1.5, 2 sides about this in the time given. And it's designed also to be an umbrella question. And I say that because by this point, if you're doing the reading section chronologically, 1, 2, 3, 4, by this point you've already done 3 other questions on this extract. You've done the language question and the structure question. So this is kind of bringing it all together and basically using those skills to help you write about a particular viewpoint that you have. Okay, so that is why you're given more marks, because you're using more skills, really. But as we know from these exam papers, question 4 and question 5 tend to be the questions where the marks really start to increase quite rapidly. So we've gone from 8 marks for question 3 already to 20. So you can see that those marks tend to congregate at the end of the paper. Okay, so it's important really that question 4 and question 5 are mastered by you, because it can be really helpful in getting the GCSE. So that is the task that we're going to be looking at today for the rest of this session. So the most important bit of information on there is actually the word clever, because that is telling us what evidence we need to find. Okay, so I have screenshotted the extract based on the line numbers, so you can see I'm looking at line 17 onwards. We're forgetting the other half, and contextually, if I just contextualize this a little bit more, so we have a character called Ruby, who's a girl who is out in a very kind of barren, empty landscape, and she is bitten by a venomous snake, and she has to make sure that she does things to maximize her chances of survival, because obviously venom kills, because it paralyzes the organs and so on. So she needs to make sure that everything that she does makes her chance of survival more likely. Okay, so I'm going to read through this, and obviously you can stop this video to reread it, or just to make notes, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to read through this, and then what I'm going to ask that you do is pause the video to find the evidence in this extract that proves that Ruby is clever because of her reaction to this potentially fatal snake bite. Okay, so the extract says, she didn't notice the hissing thing. The wind drowned out its sound. Nor did she notice it raise its head and open its jaws wide, exposing those perfectly sharp prongs of teeth. She felt it, though, a sharp pain followed by a sickening ache, a strange sensation. She turned to look it in the eyes, black eyes set in an arrow-shaped head, dark diamonds running down its brown back. She looked at it, unblinking, as it slowly wound itself back into the shadows. Suddenly everything became hyper-real. The strange crag of the rocks, one jutting stone looking almost like a dog's head. She tried to steady her breathing and reached for the notebook and pencil she had tucked inside her pocket. She drew the head shape and the markings, making a note of the colours, and once she was sure she had all the information, she removed the sneaker from her left foot, followed by her striped sock, cutting away the toe part with her penknife. Then she pushed her arm into the tube of the knitted cotton and slipped it over the wound, not too tight, but enough to support her deadening limb. Slowly she began to move herself towards the road, keeping her arm down so that the bite wound was below her heart. Looking behind her, she saw the tree was gone, carried away by the tornado. The farmer who drove by in his truck an hour later was surprised to see this young girl stumbling down the road on her own. The doctor on duty in the local hospital was astonished when upon arrival she produced a notebook containing a perfect drawing of a western rattlesnake. "That's what bit me," she said, her arm badly swollen by now, and her voice losing its strength. "Smart of you, noting everything down like that," he said as he injected the antivenom. "Rattler venom can kill in 2 hours. If we'd wasted any time trying to identify the species, well..." Which was why, from that day on, Ruby Redford resolved to know every snake by the pattern of its skin. Such knowledge might just save your life. Okay, so once you have read that, and again you can obviously go back if you want to reread it, you need to have that word clever in your head, because that is what the examiner is asking us to talk about. How the writer presents this character as quite clever and skillful. Okay, so step 1 would be to read the extract. Step 2 is with a highlighter, is to highlight the evidence that proves the opinion expressed in the question is true. Okay, so here you are looking to find evidence that Ruby is being presented as clever, and then you're going to be using that evidence to then agree with that statement that is in that question. Okay, once you have then highlighted your evidence, you then need to look at what you've highlighted and see if there is any manipulation of language. Have there been any use of techniques like similes or metaphors? Are there any interesting adjectives, verbs, or adverbs being used? Is there anything going on with sentence constructions like short sentences, long sentences? Is there ellipsis, for example? Is there any use of dialogue? So those are the 3 steps, and you keep to those 3 steps for every single extract that you work with for this question. It's the same approach every single time. The only thing that's different, obviously, is the actual focus of the task, because that changes with each extract. So the most important thing that you need to do now is to find the evidence that proves that this person that said she's clever is in fact accurate, and that means that they've understood the text. So you can pause this video now, find that evidence, and then we will go through with some possible ideas. Okay, so if we go back to that first section, you can see that I've highlighted here. I haven't coloured the whole extract in. I've been very, very selective, because even though 20 minutes is a bit longer than previous questions in this paper, it's still not a lot of time. So you have to be realistic again with what you can work with. And what matters most is obviously not copying out huge amounts of quotations. It's about expanding on why. Okay, why does this evidence make Ruby appear clever? Okay, so we've got to think about the why. Why do these things that we've highlighted make her seem like a clever person? Okay, so we've got there the adjective and blinking that I've highlighted. Okay, one word. And I would say that it's an adjective because that means I'm talking about writer's methods and using that language knowledge to support my view. So she's unblinking, which means that she's really staring very hard at this snake. You've got to ask yourself, why is she doing that? Why, at the moment when she was bitten by this snake and she could still see it, why did she really stare at it? What was she trying to do? She wasn't trying to have a staring match with it. There's a reason why she was staring at it very closely. What did she then do with that mental picture that she had made in her own mind? We've then got quite a lengthy paragraph, which is about 6, 7, 8 lines or so, which is all about what she did, the process of what she did. So there's lots of verbs in this. Reached, drew, making, removed, cutting, slipped, pushed. Okay? All of these verbs. She then moved herself, keeping her arm down. So we've got lots of verbs or lots of verb phrases which tell us quite methodically what she did after she was bitten. So we're told that she drew the snake in a notebook. She made a note of the colours. She took off her shoe, took off her sock, made the sock into a bandage, put it over her bite, and then she moved herself towards the road, keeping her arm down. You've got to ask yourself, why is she doing that? You can't just say, yeah, she's clever because she did this, because the examiner would say, well, yes, she did, but why is that showing she's clever? You haven't told me that. So you need to talk about the why, okay? So put yourself in her position. If you were bitten by a snake, you would have a choice. You could either hyperventilate, panic, and just scream for 2 hours until you're dead, or you could do what Ruby did here and be very, very methodical, very calm, very masterful, and do this kind of stuff, which is designed to perhaps maximize your chances of survival and getting to the hospital in time. Okay, so put yourself in her shoes. Why would you maybe react in this way if you were bitten by a potentially dangerous animal like a spider or a snake? Why would you do that? And therefore, why is she doing that? Because chances are it's the same for her. Okay, so that's another section you could talk about. You could also talk about the pace there. The pace slows down in terms of telling us one by one what she does. Finally, we then have a piece of dialogue from the doctor. So when she gets back to the hospital, the doctor says to her that she's smart because of the way in which she noted things down in her notebook, which then enabled him to inject the correct antivenom, the correct medicine. I didn't know this until recently, actually, but apparently there's lots of different types of snake venom, and it means that there isn't just one type of antivenom that works on them all. You have to have the specific snake, the specific venom for the right medicine. So it was very important for her to, get the snake in her mind so she can then draw it and write it down. So you've got to ask yourself, why is the doctor calling her smart here? Obviously, smart is a synonym of clever. Why, from his perspective as a medical professional, working in a place where probably he's seen lots of patients be bitten or die from venomous snakes? It makes me think of Australia, for example, or parts of South America. But why would a medical professional compliment a young girl for noting down the snake like this in his experience? What is he used to? Why has he noted, why is he complimenting her based on his own experience of being a doctor who's living in an area where clearly there are lots of dangerous animals and insects and so on? So why is he calling her clever? Okay. So those are 3 bits of evidence that you could use. Okay. So now that you have highlighted, and that you might also have selected other bits, and you're free obviously to discuss those and think about those in the same way as in the why. But now that we've got some evidence that we can work with together, you now need to look at what you've highlighted and start to think about what methods or what words have been used by the writer to support the statement about her being clever. So I've already talked about, for example, the verbs and the adjectives. Is there anything else you could talk about in terms of devices or methods that would be there to support your response? So once you have looked at the language or the methods, and you've jotted down maybe in the margin of the extract some useful use of language or structure, you then need to start thinking about how to expand your ideas. So what I often do with my students is we complete tables like this, which is a very clear and structured way of making sure you've got everything there to refer to when it comes to actually writing a response. So on the left, we've got our quotes, not all of them, but enough. In the middle, I've got my language analysis. So I've talked about, the adjectives, the verbs, the pace, the dialogue, the ending of the extract. And then importantly on the right, I've got the questions that we need to ask ourselves in order to expand on why she is clever. So you can see the subheading there is Ruby is clever because. And the answer to that will be the answers to these questions that I've put in capitals. That right-hand column is very important because if you don't talk about that right-hand column, you're not going to get many marks because this question is about evaluation. That means why. So you need to think about putting yourself in Ruby's shoes. Why is she doing these things? Okay, and why does this suggest that she is clever? One of the things that you should also do with this response is continue to use the word clever throughout your response, or other words for clever like smart or masterful or skillful, because that shows that you are answering the question. It's very easy with English to go off on a tangent, but AQA's mantra is we want the students to answer the question. And you can do that by repeatedly referring to the word clever or whatever the key word is in the actual task. Okay, so the answers to these questions on the right will be what you need to use to expand on them with your ideas. And the more that you can expand on them, the higher your mark. Okay, so you can pause this now to have a go at bringing your ideas together in terms of why do these things prove that she's clever, or alternatively you can keep watching to think about some of the answers to these questions. So this is actually what my students came up with when I did this lesson a few weeks ago. So I filled this out with them. So these ideas are their ideas. They're not my ideas. So I asked them, what does this mean? Why does this mean that she's clever? And my students actually came up with some lovely ideas. I was very impressed in this lesson with some of the ideas. And of course, you might come up with something different, and that's fine as well. One of the lovely things about English is it's all about interpretation and learning from each other and taking on board other views. So my students really strongly agreed that Ruby was clever in this extract. As I said, it's very difficult to say she isn't clever because she survived. And she survived because of her own reaction to this snake bite. So if you're going to disagree, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. So my students strongly agreed. And the reason why they strongly agreed is in the right-hand column there. So she has a keen eye for detail. She's being as specific as possible. She really studies the snake's patterns and colours so that she can write them down in a notebook, which means that she will probably get access to medicine quicker, which will save her life and reverse the effects of the venom. She didn't freeze or panic. She remained very calm, even though she knew that when you're bitten by a venomous snake, you've only got so long to work with. And for her, it was 2 hours. So she said to herself, I've got to be calm. I've got to, use my own kind. I can't freeze. I've got to use my own skills in drawing and things. If I panic and hyperventilate, it's going to be counterproductive. So she deliberately decided to remain calm and thorough. Then we get to the verbs, and clearly we are told in quite a lot of detail how methodical she was. Very thorough, very determined. She did everything very calmly. It's almost as if she knew what to do, as if she'd practiced this. She wasn't running around screaming her head off, crying. She had a very clear, structured process of what to do in an emergency. She was doing these things to make sure that the medical professionals could help her, rather than the medical professionals struggling to find the antivenom because they had to spend time figuring out what snake it was. When you haven't got much time, you need to, sometimes do things to save time. So by drawing the snake, it helped other people too. And she did survive. So because of this very methodical approach, she was able to survive. If she had run around or just given up, she would have obviously been killed. So she almost knew first aid. She had some medical knowledge about keeping the wound below her heart, which is to do with, I suppose, and I'm not a medical expert, but maybe something to do with how the venom spreads around the body. If you keep the the bite below the heart, maybe something to do with gravity, maybe. You might want to look that up, I'm not sure myself, but anyway, it's clever of her because it helped her survive. And then we get to the dialogue at the end, the doctor's dialogue. Now, he uses that word smart, so clearly, that is a really useful quote to use because it's clever, which links to our task. But the doctor compliments her for her cleverness because a lot of vital time was saved because the doctor could recognise the snake and what medicine to use. She thought ahead, so she knew that would happen. So she thought ahead to help the medical staff out. So we have, I suppose, a happy ending, a happy resolution here, if you're talking about structure, how it ends. We're also told that she says that after that, she always said that she was going to make sure that she learned the names of snakes by heart or something like that. So she's going to use this incident to help her, not treating it as a one-off, but it could happen again. And if she learns all the snakes, then she will be able to survive again, probably. Okay. So she's going to learn from it. To know every snake by the pattern of its skin, she says there. So she's learning from this as well. So that's also clever as well. She's going to use this incident to help her in future and maybe help other people as well. So the doctor's compliment there also clearly means that from a medical perspective, she acted very cleverly. Okay. So we've got a table with 3 rows, which means that we've got a very clear structure. So you could split your 20-minute response into 3 distinct paragraphs. One about the adjective, one about the verbs, and one about, from a medical perspective, how the doctor complimented her. Okay, so you've got a very clear structure there that you could stick to, very clear paragraphs. Okay, so that could be a possible plan, but it's obviously down to your own discretion, how you would want to record this response. So I'm going to now show you an example of the first paragraph. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I'm just going to give you a taster by showing you what the first paragraph could look like. So you can see there we have a 3-lined kind of introduction. I strongly agree that the writer does present Ruby as clever in this extract because of the way she responds to the emergency of being bitten by a very dangerous snake. So that is a little introduction, starting off with I strongly agree. So straight away, boom, you're giving some sense of evaluation. You're giving a viewpoint, and that's exactly what the examiner is looking for. Okay, it's clear what you think. And because you're saying to them, I strongly agree, and you're using that word clever again, it shows that you're answering the question, and it shows that you are, almost with precision, looking at the extract, finding the evidence that's relevant, and then talking about it. So it says, despite feeling a sharp pain and sickening ache almost immediately, she reacted calmly in order to maximise the chances that she survived. The adjective and blinking suggests that she was thorough and determined to make a visual image of the snake, as she could draw it to show a doctor, which she ends up doing. Rather than panicking and hyperventilating, she responded carefully and expertly to the situation, because she was clever enough to know this would make it more likely that she would survive. This implies that she is wise and is able to think on her feet with a sharpness of mind. So the words that I've underlined there, clever, sharpness of mind, wise, obviously means I'm answering the question. It's about her skill. Okay, it's about how clever she was, how quick-witted she was. I've also got there the red, the method. I've referred to that adjective and blinking. So there is a real sense here that the methods that the writer is using is complementing or supporting the student's viewpoint. They are using the evidence and the methods to help them evaluate. And that's what the more successful candidates will do. They've also got words in there like suggests and implies, which again obviously is to do with analysis and evaluation. So I would also argue that students should be using those as well. So that's an example of kind of the small introduction and the first paragraph. Okay. Now you might want to use that as a guide to write the next 2 paragraphs to finish this response off, or you might want to use this as an example or a model and rewrite this paragraph using this as a guide to help you. But at this point in a lesson, I would now start to ask students to put it all together and to start bringing it all together to write a response. Okay. So you're aiming to write something along those lines. Okay. So if we come towards the end of this presentation, then there are 3 components to this task. Okay. Cue for quotes, WM for writer's methods, and D for development of ideas. And when you add all those together, out the other end comes critical evaluation. So your response for all question 4s that you do for paper 1 need these 3 components in there. Okay. The most important bit really is development of ideas. You need to make sure that you are answering the question by expanding on the why. Why is this character clever? Why is this setting particularly spooky? Why do we have sympathy for this character? Whatever the task is, it's always about us saying why and using the quotes and the writer's methods to support that. So that's quite a useful equation, I suppose, to have. You put all these components together and out the other end comes CE, which is critical evaluation. Okay. Summary, 20 minutes, 20 marks. A good way of getting some marks in the bag. It's always useful to get question 4 and 5 mastered to some extent, just because, for paper 1, you've got 40 plus 20. That's 60 marks out of 80 that just comes from 2 questions. And therefore, they're just so useful to get right, because they can be often the difference between a grade boundary. It's designed to be a mini essay, and because you're bringing together all of the skills that you have learned for the other questions before. Okay, you start your response with either strongly agree or partly agree, but never disagree, because as you can now see, it would be harder for you to disagree with that extract because there's very little evidence there to say that she's stupid. She's clearly not a stupid girl. So, help yourself out, strongly agree or partly agree. Once you have identified, the specific focus of the task, you need to find the evidence which proves that task. So in this example today, the task was about a character being clever, and that helped us find the evidence, only about the things that proves that she's clever. Okay, so your evidence always has to be relevant to the task and the keyword in the question. So at the bottom there, make sure that you know what the keyword is, what the focus is, and just stick to that focus. Okay, and then that will give your writing precision, but it will probably also give you some time, actually, because it means you're not trying to talk about 100 different things. You're just focusing on the one thing. Okay, so if I just go back to this previous PowerPoint, you need your quotes, writer's methods, and development of ideas, and that will equal critical evaluation. So that is paper 1, question 4 of the AQA English Language course. Thank you.